I wanted to open this by discussing the great conservationist, Roger Payne. I believe both of you know him. You've worked with him on your project CETI. He had this quite remarkable experience. I don't think I fully appreciated in the late 1960s that naval officers were using hydrophones, microphones underwater, to listen during the Cold War for Russian subs. And it was the first time human beings had recorded whale song. I didn't realize that. How did that story unfold? And how did Roger Payne get his hands on this?
Well, before getting to that, we have to understand how miraculous it was that it was even recognized that these were whale sounds, because whales were thought to be mute animals. No one thought they made any sound because, after all, you couldn't hear them if you put your head in the water, and we didn't have hydrophones, so we didn't have any way of knowing they were making sounds. The only people who had an inkling that whales were making sounds were sailors who were below decks on ships and heard these haunting noises, which they, of course, ascribed to sea monsters or ghosts mostly. And it just remained in the realm of mythology until Roger cracked that code.
And how did he come on the information? Like, how did he piece it together? You're studying whale sounds and communication. How did he piece it together?
Well, we met through Roger. We were just realizing this. We had a dinner together around 2019. But,
sometime before the pandemic. Everything is now judged by pre or post-pandemic, of course. This was a pre-pandemic event.
But the story of how we heard, I mean, even the idea of sirens of the sea with wooden boats, and you would hear humpback whales, and they would think it was these underwater singers. So there is like long stories of people hearing the songs of whales, and then kind of really documenting it. So it started with listening for the war, trying to, when submarines, those fun things were invented, they began listening, and it was Frank Watlington who had recordings from the Navy that he had like gotten approval to share this kind of top secret classified information with Roger, and he played him these sounds. And but then the story gets even longer because he knew they were whales, but him and Katie sat with these songs for a long time, you know, playing them over and over. And Katie Payne was also a musician. And they began just like letting these songs kind of play in their house over and over and over again. And then seeing the musical elements that at 30 minutes, the song would repeat. And they would change the rhythm and change the tempo. So kind of putting that together, that this was actually a 20, 30-minute song.
Once they realized the structure, that it was a highly structured series of notes. It wasn't just random notes. That really changed everything.
So they put out this famous album, Songs of the Humpback Whale. We have to listen to it, right? We have to listen to one song. So. You can hear structure. I'm sorry. I could keep going. I could just get mesmerized. But how these songs can travel across the ocean, that's really quite stunning. Are these the loudest animals that we...
Humpbacks are not the loudest of the animals, but whales in general are pretty loud. Probably the loudest would be an adult male sperm whale.
Of all the animals?
Of all the animals. And you have to realize that you always have to reference it to something. So what are you referencing it against? And remember, it's sound traveling in water is a little different than sound traveling in air. The denser the medium, the farther and faster the sound can go, and the lower the frequencies, the farther it can travel before it degrades. Think about if you've ever been like at a traffic light and someone in the car next to you is playing their stereo, and you probably hear the bass beat really well, but you probably can't tell what song it is because the treble fades out. The high pitches, actually, they attenuate. They don't travel very far, but the low sounds, they travel very far, and that's why you can hear it even though you're in a different car next to them. Same thing with whales. So the lower the frequencies, the farther it can travel. So you can have whales that are half an ocean apart who think they're in the same pod swimming, even though they don't see each other, because they're still in communication, kind of like we would be with a cell phone in communication.
Now, this kicks off really a tremendous conservation movement, and it leads ultimately to the end of commercial whaling, at least in this country and in many countries. Do you consider it like one of the most successful conservation moves of all time, is, understanding that they communicate through song? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, they published the Songs of the Humpback Whale. You're just looking at the album. And this was in Science magazine, a cover kind of showing the songs, really beautiful. Roger had such a kind of artistic mindset, and then I just like, you know him as a character, like, he's just incessant, He found these songs and he was going everywhere with a cassette and a pair of headphones, like putting it on Judy Collins. He got it's in like Star Trek, it's in the Golden Record, it's out.
Right, Voyager, the
Voyager.
spacecraft that's traveled the furthest that human beings have ever sent anything to space, features one of the songs.
Do you know that the sounds of a whale are what were used for the dinosaur sounds in Jurassic Park?
I did not know.
It's a whale.
Now, this is not a humpback whale, but this is a blue whale. Is that right? And is this the largest creature, Joy, that has ever
That
been
depends
the
on
Earth to be
what
known?
you define as large. If you are saying, is it the longest
Like a really
creature?
big animal,
There are
is what I mean.
dinosaur lovers who will say that the Seismosaurus is probably the longest dinosaur, but it's missing a couple of vertebrae in the tail, so we're not really sure how long the whip-like tail is. But if we want to talk about mass, and when we say largest, we mean biggest, heaviest, widest, and all that, the blue whale is definitely by far the largest animal that has ever lived and is still alive today.
I did not appreciate that they exceeded dinosaurs.
If you want to think about how big is a blue whale, you have to think about a 737 jet. Imagine a 737 jet. It would fill this room. It would go all the way to the back where those glass doors are. Take the wings off the jet, and that's your blue whale. That's exactly what it looks like.
Now, these were once land animals. How do these, their ancestors were kind of like deer, if I understand correctly, and they're mammals. How did these, we all once came out of the sea, how did these deer-like creatures 50 million years ago make their way back into the ocean? Do you want to try?
I could take, you get to the oldest whales are like 50 million years ago, and there's one by the name of Pachycetus, because it was found in Pakistan, and it looks like almost like a small dog. And a lot of this is, it was maybe a vegetarian that was chased into the water, or something was pushing it into the water, and they became first semi-aquatic. So it was only just, in the 1990s that they kind of understood that hippopotamus were the closest living semi-aquatic relative to those. And then it goes to kind of a long storied history of the ancient whales. And then you get to the modern whales, the baleen whales and the toothed whales. They're called odontocytes. And they split around 36 million years ago. So you could probably talk more.
Well, timeline aside, just like why did they even pursue this niche in the water is really an interesting story, because we're talking about an herbivore ancestor, something that's very much like a very small deer. It even had hoofs, okay? And this animal, it was vegetarian, had a multi-chambered stomach, we assume, because it's related to the other artiodactyl animals, sheep and cattle and deer and, all these animals that chew their cud. And so this animal was pursuing prey near the water's edge for some reason. We don't know if they were chased there by predators. We don't know what happened. But remember, evolution doesn't have foresight. It doesn't say, I want to go in this direction and become a sea animal. It's really evolution, but in hindsight, becomes a pathway that an animal's trajectory is taken through many generations because of natural selection. In other words, if it has a couple of odd traits that didn't create a problem for it, they would be retained. But if it created a problem, they would be eliminated. So what happened is these animals were pursuing food near the water's edge. And guess what? If you're an herbivore, and you're on the water's edge and you're eating plants that live in the water's edge, some of those plants have little bugs in them, little tiny shrimp-like things. Well, if you're stripping the leaves and you get a few of those bug shrimp-like things in your mouth, and you're like, that's a lot more protein than I got just from eating the leaves. So maybe those animals that could digest it a little bit better are the ones that survived, and so on down the line, till these herbivores became carnivores, adapted for getting prey in the water, step by step by step.
And we can see vestigial features in their anatomy. I mean, they have hands under those flippers, don't they?
So this word vestigial, it always bothers me, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Because vestigial means it has no function. And that's not really true. Most vestigial structures have a function, they just don't have the function that you expected it to have, because its primary function may have disintegrated. Take, for example, your appendix. Everyone says the appendix is vestigial. It's actually not. It's just not a good cecum, which is what would be used for fermenting cellulose. We don't ferment cellulose. We are what we call secondary vegetarians. We eat the animals that can digest it. And that's how we get that energy from the sun. But what is the appendix doing? It's actually an immune organ. Can we do without it? Yes, because we have redundancy. But that doesn't mean it didn't have a function. It is vestigial in the sense of being a fermentation vat. So in the case of these the whales, what's vestigial in a whale? We can talk about hind legs being vestigial, but if you look through the trajectory of evolution of whales, as those legs got smaller and smaller, we have to assume they still had a function. So when whale ancestors looked more crocodilian in their body shape, where they had front legs and back legs and were crouched at the water's edge, they were probably using those hind legs to spring forward and perhaps catch prey at the water's edge that might have been walking along the edge. But as they became open water swimmers, they may have been paddling a bit with those legs. As their tail became more powerful, they still had legs. If you look at fossils of Basilosaurus, it still has legs. It's kind of like a backwards T-Rex, because it has really big front legs and really tiny back legs. T-Rex is the other way around, of course. So why would it even have any hind legs? My particular thought is that they were used as claspers in mating, the same way sharks do, so to help grab onto the mate. So they had a function, it just wasn't in locomotion anymore. So in that sense, they were vestigial for locomotion, but they were not a vestigial structure overall. And eventually, as mating became more elaborate with their elongated penis, and we can go into a lot of interesting stuff about reproduction of whales. Remember, we did Sex in the Wild. You can go look that up. But as they found other ways to mate without needing those hind legs, then the hind legs eventually did disappear.
And do you think, David, that their ability to communicate, to vocalize in this complex way originated way far back when they were land animals, or do you think it was something that specifically adapted when whales became fully marine? What's the word I'm looking for? Aquatic.
Well, we've seen some things now that are really, I mean, now they're very vocal, they're chatting up a storm. It's also, what's interesting, even just like thinking of just walking through this process, we were talking earlier about how the nose kind of rolled over the head and became a blowhole. And it's even this amazing feat that we, as humans, have this ability to breathe and eat through the same orifice. And, and then eventually you're like, we're making these sounds, buh, nah, nah. And comes language and comes all these things. So it's like a big question, because they're so sonic, because eyes don't even work that good underwater. And especially if they're now living very deep. Like I'm kind of in love with sperm whales.
That's why I wore sperm whale on my shirt today.
So I'm very whale specific. And actually I just learned a really cool fact just earlier as we were upstairs, is that one nostril is used for breathing and one nostril is used for sound. So
with sperm whales?
Yeah, they're like
so the blowhole is really a nostril.
Yeah.
But this one has two, because this is a blue whale. But the sperm whale has one blowhole, and then where's the other nostril? Somewhere else?
So
I've seen you climbing around the carcass of an animal, and it's really quite terrifying.
She loves a bone, yeah, I mean.
I decided not to include the visuals. I encourage you, if you have a morbid fascination, all 5 feet of joy inside an animal with a scalpel the size of a hockey stick.
But I also decided that these are the original Kundalini, that, thinking about this, amazing, but Joy's not agreeing with that. And now we know they're the OG vegetarians, so if anyone, especially we're here at Brooklyn, these guys are a super OG. They're like the first veggie,
So the second nostril is somewhere else in the body entirely.
So let me explain. So before we get into that, we have to understand that whales come in two flavors.
Oh.
There are whales that have teeth.
We not use flavors.
Two flavors.
These
okay.
guys?
There's whales like these guys, right? They have baleen in their mouth, okay? Which is what they use for filter feeding. This is a material that's made out of keratin, which is the same stuff that's in your fingernails or your hair. I have a couple of pieces over there that I can show you. Those two big, long, black things over there are from a right whale. Right whale was called the right whale because it was the correct whale to kill. So that is from a right whale. They have a really, really big mouth, and those are a lot taller than I am. They're upside down, so the wide part goes into the upper jaw. And if you hold one of those next to me, you'll see that it's a lot bigger than me, which means Jonah probably could fit in the mouth of a whale, but probably was never swallowed by one because the throat's too small. The other kind of whale are the whales with teeth. Here's an example of a tooth. This is from a sperm whale. So it's a beautiful example. It's really, really big, very pointy, very cone-shaped. And you can see an orca skull over there with lots of teeth in it. All the teeth look the same in the case of whales. They all have these cone-shaped teeth. So you have the whales with baleen, and they have the whales with teeth. Now, the whales with baleen have two nostrils on the top of their head. So their nose is moved all the way to the top of their head. It's as if they just pushed it up like this and made an internal snorkel. So when they get to the surface of the water, they can actually breathe very easily because they just graze the surface and the nose is already there to take that breath. Toothed whales also have two nasal passageways through their skull. And later on, I'll show you some skulls up in the back. There's a table with lots of show and tell, and I will be there to demonstrate stuff. And I'll show you some dolphin skulls where you can put your fingers in the holes in the skull and realize that's where the two nasal passageways are. But above that, the two passageways have fused into one spout, like a snorkel. And so they look like they have only one nostril on the outside, but on the inside, they have two nasal passageways. Mm-hmm. Now, sperm whales are the weirdest because their two nasal passageways are asymmetrical. So instead of having two parallel passageways, they have one that's functionally just for breathing, and that's on their left side, and the passageway is quite large. And they have one on the other side that's really tiny. It allows a little bit of air to come through, and that's kind of like when you hold a balloon and you squeak the little end of the balloon and get that noise. That's what they're doing. As it comes through the narrow passageway, they can control that flow, and that's the sound-producing side, which means whales can't afford to get a cold because they have to use both nostrils for two different things. There's no redundancy for them.
Now, this is a sperm whale. They're very unusual looking. They have enormous noses, right? That's what you would call it.
Oh, yeah.
And these
biggest
small
nose in the
lower
animal
jaws.
kingdom.
Right. Why your work in particular with, I call it CETI. We were discussing this as well. So some people might know SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and CETI could be pronounced the same, but I like to call it CETI, so I know the difference. Tell us what it stands for again. Cetacean.
The Cetacean Translation Initiative, and it's an homage to the SCTI, where this is about looking outward for life in other galaxies, and we're like interterrestrial exploration, looking for these aliens here on Earth. But they're connected because if we did find ET in their own setting, there is like 10 to 30 stars somewhere, there's going to be. And how would we communicate and how would we translate? So this project is about translating the communication of whales using artificial intelligence, robotics, linguistics, putting together a really interdisciplinary team to kind of focus singularly on, there's a whale with a washed up. Anyway,
I know, with joy, again.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Now you get the size. That's only showing you the head of the sperm whale, of which 90% of it is its nose. Biggest nose in the animal kingdom.
Biggest nose, yeah. 1/3 of it is the if is a head, and it has an 18-pound brain. highly encephalized, parts of the brain with like spindle cells and neuroanatomy that is similar to humans in terms of like love and intuition and emotions. And here they are, and sperm whales are kind of weirdos among the weirdos, like, because they look weird. I like them. I kind of like the weird music too, or they're like the techno. Like the humpback whale, everybody loves the humpback whale. It's like, can you do their humpback whale song that you did earlier? Thanks, Joy. So
it's okay. He's going to do a sperm whale later.
I'm not going to make you do that, because that would be awkward. And but I wouldn't. I'm not going to try myself either. But that was amazing. That was really amazing. And but like that, like, oh mother, it's like for humans that like goes right into our heart, and we're all like this big balls of emotion, like, oh my god, I love these whales, I'm gonna save them. And but with sperm whales, I got like a bigger challenge because we're gonna play them later, and they're just like. So they're like the tech. Maybe if I'm in a group, if you guys were all techno enthusiasts, you'd be like a big bowl of mush too. But I'm a big bowl of mush around them now, but they're very complicated. And at first, like the story too that you're bringing up, that we didn't even know whales vocalized. There's actually a woman that got forgotten, Marie Fish, which is a great name, by the way. Like we give Frank Watlington a lot of credit, but Marie Fish, look up Marie Fish. She was like also found whale sounds earlier than is given credit. Now they're kind of going back and rightfully giving credit to that. And then it was 1957 that there's an article in Nature that sperm whales are vocalizing. So like Moby Dick, they're the feature of Moby Dick. They're like the Leviathan, these killers that are sinking boats. And here they are, this animal with a huge brain that are using these. First, they just knew in 57 that they're clicking, because the clicks don't travel as far underwater. Could go a couple kilometers. That was that's where I stopped. I don't do the humpbacks. There we go. Okay, that's echolocating. So they're like the bats of the sea, or like I'm also with Nat Geo. They're like, no, actually, the bats are the whales of the land. So we fight over which is which. But anyway, you could pick your side if you're a land or a, but they're like, they're sonic. Like probably, like I always think about it as a human. Like I would like try to describe vision, and you'd be like, oh, it's really easy. Like I basically just open my eyeball, and there's this star out there, and it's giving a couple photons, and they're gonna like hit my retina, and I could just like open it really quickly, and I'm gonna see this image in depth perception and all these different kind of colors and wavelengths, and I'm gonna see motion and depth perception, and I could just happen so quick. Like probably when we can to communicate with whales, like probably their sound is as rich and textured as our vision, because it's this primary sense that they're putting so much of their brain towards.
Well, not only that, they actually recreate what they hear as an image. We know this because the part of the brain that lights up in dolphins when they're echolocating and receiving the sound is the occipital cortex, which is the part in us that does vision, and in other animals. So they probably interpret that sound in a visual way.
I've always wondered that about bats, if they were seeing the echolocation, if that's what their qualia experience was.
That's what we think is happening, but until we can talk to them and ask them, we don't really know.
And this is, sorry, please.
We can echolocate. Like if there's this cool exercise, well, even Thomas Nagel wrote this famous essay, like To Be a Bat, and kind of is like the idea that we can never really understand or have this umwelt of a bat because we don't echolocate, but
we do.
But we do. And there's a lot of people that don't have vision, and suddenly their sense of hearing becomes really intensified, and so you just have to focus on it. And if you focused on it for 35 million years, you would.
But think about when a blind
my
person
focus is like 10 minutes.
When a blind person is walking down the street, they'd be tapping that cane. They're not just tapping the cane to make sure they don't stumble on something. They're also listening for the echo. If there's a building next to them, it gives a different echo than if there's a field next to them. I actually met a blind person who did echolocate and taught me how to do it. I'm not good at it, but I was able to close my eyes in a room and figure out where the door was because the echo didn't bounce off the doorway. So it can be done. And he was so good he could find an apple on the table, but I wasn't that good.
So those sounds you heard, those are biosonar. And they're shooting, and Joy could give you, I mean, it's really cool how they make the sounds and how they produce it, but they're shooting the sounds back, and then they're processing the echo into their lower jaw, and then there's whatever we want to call it, seeing or hearing. But then they're also, at the surface, they're using this like Morse code, and they call them codas. And they only thought there were a few of them, like click, 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 which is a click we hear a lot in Dominica.
Right.
But we're finding now that there's more than just a few of these. There's like deep structure inside of these.
So that's a very important distinction. One is that they're using the sound to maybe visually map their environment, but you're saying then they're doing something else in addition with sound, which is, the codas are kind of like, would you say they're vowels in some sense?
Just finding vowel-like features in them, and we wouldn't have found them. Well, we could talk about the vowels, but first thing, it was kind of like when you have an alien or an unknown communication system, it's like first you have to understand the real fundamental units of their language. So the first thing that we found was like, we call it the phonetic alphabet. And it's their alphabet is using musical pieces like tempo, rhythm, rubato. So you could be click, 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 or you could go click, 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 click. Or you could do an ornament. You could be like click, 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 click. And that you'd be like, oh, that was just an extra one. They made my mistake. But then it turns out those are important. And then they could start using those in combination. Like I went to Pioneer Works, and then I went to the after party, and then the after party, and the after party. And just keep going on and on forever. Or they could be context. Like, I'll meet you at the statue at 2 o'clock. There's a lot of context in that. And so we're now showed that sperm whales could use those clicks for context combination. And then we were actually, we hold this conference, like it's a nerd fest of like AI people and animal. We hold one at Berkeley. It's like decoding communication in non-human species. And we brought Joyce Poole and Mickey Pardo, who are studying elephants. And in terms of elephants, it's the timing. Like sometimes an elephant will say something to another elephant, and it'll be like 15 minutes, and the other elephant will respond. And it'll be like, that would be so awkward if we're on stage here now, and I just like went silent for 15 minutes, and they're like, and then I'm like, actually, that's a good question. But so it was the timing, and Gaspar Begas, the linguist on the CETI team, he took the spaces out in between, and then when you play it, you hear like like these little features, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So it's like now we're like, oh, now we have these vowel-like features on top of the alphabet. So the complexity is just getting deeper and deeper as we look.
And
further.
So let's listen. I played it a little prematurely, but let's listen to one of those, which you're saying this is quite distinct from echolocation. This is really some form of communication, complex form of communication. Now, are many of them communicating here, or is it one dominating?
There's a lot of them communicating, yeah. And sometimes they talk on top of each other, and that's maybe not rude.
Like what we're doing, yeah. So that's kind of a huge discovery, because now you're suggesting, my dog can bark, but he does not tell a good story. You know what I'm saying? There's no setup, there's no punchline. So vocalizing is not synonymous with communicating. And you're saying you're really distinguishing here that this isn't just dogs barking or wolves howling and setting off other wolves howling, but you really feel that there's another form of communication going on. And Joy, actually, to that point, I want to understand a little bit how they are doing this with such limited air supply, right? So they're getting air on the surface, and then sometimes they're plunging for an hour more.
This is really a very interesting question of physics and what happens to gases. So gases compress under pressure. So the deeper you go, the less volume you have to work with, which means that sperm whales have to take, and all whales, have to take as much air as they can down with them, because they're not going to have a lot to work with when they're at depth. And air is such a precious commodity that they don't want to lose that air to the outside world. Can I do an experiment here with everyone for a second?
Okay, sure.
I want you to try to make sound like a whale. Everyone go, ah, let me hear you, ah. Put your hand on your throat. You feel that vibration? That's how humans are communicating through the mouth, but your voice box is vibrating. Okay, now I want you to make sounds like a whale. Close your mouth and vibrate. No, you're doing it wrong. Close your nose and your mouth and do it. What happened? You pressurized the system. Once you pressurized, no flow. No flow, no sound. So how did the whales solve that? The baleen whales who are vibrating here have added a sac. They've added a balloon. Air goes into the balloon. They can recycle it, send it back, and do it over and over and over. They don't have to go up to the surface to get another breath of air. They're saving the air that they use, but they allow it to flow. How do sperm whales and toothed whales do it? They have balloons up around their nose because their nose, remember, is moved to the top of their head, and their upper lip has rolled back like this, okay? So if you take your lip and roll it back on both sides like that, that's how they close their nose, just like that. And then if they want to make sound, they have to vibrate that. So you know how you make like a Bronx cheer or raspberry and go, well, they're doing it through their nose. They're going through their nose. And that is the clicks that are used for communication and for echolocation. Now, the funny thing about the clicks for sperm whales is there's not a lot of inflection in the clicks like we have with inflection. I can say hi or I can say hi. And it means two different things, right? Because I use different inflections. Sperm whales might be giving extra information, as you said, in the spaces in between the clicks. So we are focusing on clicks, but we need to also focus on the spacing between the clicks because that may be their way of doing their inflections. So they're doing it with this very weird mechanism of a vibration of these lips. And inside a sperm whale, it kind of looks like the mouth of a Muppet. So imagine a Muppet's mouth popping open and closed. That's what makes the vibration. And eventually on the screen, maybe we'll get back to it, there was a nice picture of a CT scan and MRI scan that we did of a sperm whale. My colleague over here, Dr. Fleischer, is the one who helped me do those scans. And those sperm whale scans show really cool anatomy. There it is. Really cool now. So you see the dark part on the very top, at the very front of the animal, near the top of the animal, it's very white. And those are the Muppet lips. And when the Muppet lips vibrate as air goes through them, the vibration is then transmitted all along that dark triangular thing, which is called the spermaceti sac. It's a weird name. It comes from the fact that the fluid in it is white and looks like sperm, which is why sperm whales got their name, because they thought they were full of sperm in their head. They couldn't figure it out. The sailors didn't understand. Why did the female sperm whales have it? I don't know. They're not biologists. Anyway, it reflects off the back of the head and then down into this area in the bottom, which is so fascinating to me because it's an alternating series of light and dark bands that gets bigger like a megaphone, and the sound comes out at the very bottom. So that thing with the alternating bands is probably some sort of a filter that filters the sounds and may also intensify certain frequencies. So it's then acting as a megaphone, and then the sound comes out the front, and it is the most powerful sound in the animal kingdom. I have heard stories of people being pushed off the front of sperm whales because of the pulse that comes out of them.
And you were going to say, I believe you have opinions about the naming.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're probably not happy about their name, and they were named by the whalers. And I mean, it's just such a, for us, it's like interesting to think of like these animals that were considered such killers, and now we're just learning that they're not, and we could swim.
Sorry, I'm going the wrong way.
Which you're going the wrong way.
Sorry,
you put
ignore
your
me.
hand inside a sperm whale.
No, but you were saying that the sperm whales are matrilinear. Is that right? Can you tell me a little bit about their social organization? Because you were saying how much more gentle the bulls were than was sort of previously described. But can we just sort of understand their social organization for a minute? Because that seems to me to be very key when we're imagining mammals communicating, that they have a social bond. So how do they organize?
So they call them matrilineal, as you said, is that, so there's not a matriarch, there's not like a dominant female. And it's communities and clans of grandmothers, mothers, and and kids. And usually when the males get to sub-adult stage, 12, 13, they kind of sort of, the story is they get thrown out and kicked out of the group, and eventually they'll find like another, they call them bachelor pairs, and then eventually they become solitary.
So the males are solitary, but not the females.
They'll found all the way from pole to pole, and they get huge. They get, the females are about 40
We had
feet.
a picture of a male-female comparison. Let me see if I can get that back.
So I was like, the females are like the size of a school bus, and not to give them any body image issues. And the males
Svelte.
are two school buses. So they're just huge. I mean, that's the first thing you see when, like, the first time I swam with them is like this size. That the fact that there's another mammal this big, the size we're talking about, blue whales are bigger than any dinosaur, and I'm in their environment, and like, the first time my heart is jumping, and then you see that they're so gentle, they're so curious, and you could almost show the anatomy. They don't only have one set of jaws, which they don't use that much. So there's almost no chance of them biting you. So you don't have to worry about that. And the females are kind of stay within a range. Like we're working in Dominica where there's about 200 to 400 different types of clans, and they kind of move around. Some are there almost all the time. Some kind of show up, but
Now, these are old animals. I mean, how old would the grandmother be in this 3-generation?
We just talked about that upstairs. The oldest whale is over 200 years old, but Joy was saying that...
So some of these whales, in some sense, can remember commercial whaling.
They do, and they still hold those stakes inside of them. Sometimes they date them by whaling objects that are embedded in them in their blubber.
Wow. And sorry, you were going to say, Joy.
I was going to say it's a little bit easier to date the age of a sperm whale than it is a baleen whale, because you can section the teeth in a sperm whale and count the rings like you would if you were looking at a tree and you were counting rings. But with baleen whales, it's much harder because the baleen plates fray and wear off kind of like your fingernails. You're always growing new stuff out, so we can't really count ridges on baleen plates. So the oldest whale ever found was one that had a harpoon point that dated the harpoon back to around 180 years, and add to the fact that it probably wasn't hunted until the whale was of size to be huntable. So it wasn't born 180 years ago. It was already a mature animal 180 years ago, which meant it estimated it to be around 200 years old or older.
Fascinating. So I've also heard that these sperm whales have dialects, and some of these dialects are quite ancient. How can you determine that they have a dialect?
The dialects are, you would look at different groups of them and there would be slight variations. Some of them are in the same area. Like they're, depending on who they hang out with, will depend on their accent. Like there's British and Scottish, and I'm sure that probably once we're able to translate, they're saying, horrible things about each other. Maybe they're not, maybe they're nice whales. So they'll have distinct dialects. We went into this project with that knowledge that there's dialects, and now it's like, it's kind of like peeling the layers upon this. So each time we look, I knew that I started as by the way, I'm kind of like a party crasher here in the whale scene. Enjoys it because I only started studying whales in 2019. Like I was a microbiologist who just kind of like landed here, but I knew that like I love pond scum and weird things, like all little tiny lives and the history of life and photosynthesis. But I always knew that like you could look at a protozoa, and if we stare at it intensely, there'll be like amazing things on it. And we've seen a lot of Nobel Prizes, like Elizabeth Blackburn finding telomeres. And so I was like, when I moved to Wales, I was like, oh my God, there's so little that we really know about them and their social lives. And they're incredibly complicated. So I
That's
kind
because
of
we can't put them under the microscope.
No, and
They're
that's
not
kind
easy
of
to
fortunate.
study. You know how hard it was to drag some of these things here today?
That's why I've got these glasses, though, from so many years of like staring at a microscope. So, it's...
Right. So, I mean, that is very interesting how restricted you are in terms of studying their anatomy. You can't bring them back to your lab. And so you're really often doing field work on animals that have died or been injured. And so how limited is your access to this kind of understanding and information? And in particular, you've been describing specifically how they cycle the air, breath, I suppose, in this very clever way to make the most of it, but they also hear in a very unusual way.
They do hear in a very unusual way. And actually, I brought a demonstration, which we can try. So I brought with me some dolphin jaws. I'm going to pass it to you guys.
You're the big, I got my hands.
Okay.
Yeah, okay,
So
I'll do one. I'll do one, you do one.
Well, no, you need to do both to get the effect.
No, you don't need both.
Okay, all right.
You don't need
Let's
both.
do one.
Okay, so I want you to just scratch the side of this jaw. Okay? And notice what sound it makes.
We'll leave these afterwards so that 500 of you can make contact. with
I will
this.
definitely bring it to the table and you can try it. Now I want you to put that against your ear because that's about where the jaw is on the dolphin. Now scratch it the same way and tell us what you're hearing.
It's really loud.
Yeah, it's really loud.
So what you've done
So
is...
it's an amplifier.
Yeah, it's like a little megaphone right there. So these jaws are hollow, and inside those hollow jaws are fat. And it is the fat inside this hollow space, see where my finger's going in here, that is transmitting sound that's received on the jaw back to the ear. And that is how toothed whales hear their world. Baleen whales...
So do they have ears as well? They do have ears as well, you're saying.
But they don't have what we call a pinna. They don't have this part sticking out. They have what we have inside, and they can process the sound inside with their ears. But instead of it coming through the ear canal, it's coming from the jaw instead. So they have a different path.
Is this a jawbone?
This is also a jawbone. And if you look at this jawbone, it's not big and thin and hollow at the end. This is a jawbone of a baleen whale. It's a little bit... You know what? You hold this for me. I got it.
They won't be able to hear you, though.
Coming over here. So if I hold this up like this, you can see that it's got a little hollow over here, but it's not a really big, thin hollow, and this is very clunky in comparison to the thin jaw that I showed on the dolphin. So they're probably not getting a lot of sound through this because it's not holding all that fat. Instead, they're getting sound from the bottom of their skull.
Dramatic pause.
Yeah, I love that.
At the bottom of the skull, there's a big ear, okay? There's a big round thing that looks like a grenade. I have some examples on the table in the back, which I'll show you. And it rocks. And it rocks when sound is transmitted through the entire skull. So they're using their whole skull to receive the sound vibration. Why do they need their whole skull? Because the frequencies they're communicating with are so low that the peak-to-peak distance in the waves is so long that a small little thing like an ear isn't going to pick it up. It needs a larger satellite dish to receive it.
Please.
Well, I was going to say, also tell them about bone conduction. Like sperm whales, they'll click right into each other's heads. And you'll see a lot of pictures of them, like, you know, they got these nice soft heads, and they'll just go right up to each other. So, you know, and
Like
shoot the sound.
It's like the Maori greeting, right? Like this. Exactly. They go like that.
Yes. Yes, that's close. Yeah. You know, so even with one of the features that we're finding, these vowels, which are like in the click, there will be like a format in there, like a little substructure, but these disappear quite quickly. So it could be that more complex information is kind of given right into each other's heads. And then, you know, imagine if I was talking to you across the football field, I probably wouldn't be like, you know, philosophizing and, you know, talking about Heidegger or anything like that. You know, I would, you know, so anyway, it would be a different scene. So,
So let's hear another sound that you shared, and I believe this is related to birth of a whale. Is that right? Let's hear this one.
that's right.
Yeah, they're talking to each other.
So
there's exchange.
This exchange is one of the most miraculous things that I'd seen in my scientific career. And this is something that we're going to be sharing more later this year, but just a little bit. We were out one day and doing what we normally do is we go out looking for the whales and then start recording them. But in our team, you know, there's now 50 people in the team, and there's a computer vision specialist, Antonio Tarabla at MIT, and he was like, you know, the next time you go out, like, I want to look at whale body language with drones. So please just throw up 2 drones in the air at 45-degree angles. So you could get these pictures. So we came across like 12 whales.
I know I have the picture somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, you could find it.
Okay.
But it was weird because they were two groups. Well, this is getting further along, but you can leave this one. And they were just kind of going up and down, up and down. And we sent the drones up for 2 hours.
Two groups of 10 or how
It
many?
was 12 whales.
12, you said. Okay.
And then we saw like thrashing, and the whales were just, creating like a huge, storm. And we thought maybe there was some shark that was, attacking this unit, and maybe they were being defensive and acting weird this morning because there was some predator around. And then we saw this massive amount of blood, and it was kind of, especially because Shane Garrow, the lead whale biologist, knows every whale individually by name, just by little characteristics of the fluke. And then all of a sudden, this tiny little head, this little baby sperm whale head emerges from there. And we didn't know until we actually looked at the drone footage that what detail we were watching. And we also had, those sounds were the communication. And what they did is they worked for 6 hours to lift the baby. And this is kind of cool evolutionary things because giving birth in the water and the babies are negatively buoyant. So the baby sperm whale, which is like a 16-month gestation, would just sink. So they needed this social structure. And they don't have arms. So they collaborated for all this time, and they knew it was happening. And they, lifted, and we're watching this baby whale being, this picture kind of shows, you'll see in there's like one whale like on top of the whale there, a little baby one, you can't really see it from there. But then it got even crazier where other cetaceans like rolled in and pilot whales came in.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
those are pilot whales. Yeah, you can
see
see the pilot whales. Yeah, Joey can pick them up.
But also see the baby lying on top of
And
the
then
whale on the
you
surface.
see the
That's
Fraser
crazy.
dolphins in the left.
Yeah.
So then, like all of a sudden, like it's a real shit show. It's like it's like this whole splashing, and the pilot whales are there, and the Fraser dolphins, and these whales, these 12 whales, are holding the baby above water, and then it's
And that's so the baby can breathe?
so the baby, until it was able, its fluke. This was a cool thing. The fluke came out totally folded, and it took time for the fluke to unfold. So it was kind of slithering around like a snake, and they were all lifting it.
Right. Remember, they're born tail first so that they don't have this urge to breathe until the whole baby is out. And then once the whole baby's out, the mother twists, snaps that umbilical cord, and then it's basically the communication sounds of all hands on deck because we just had a birth here. Everybody is involved. This is the survival of your species. And everybody gets involved in making sure that baby lives and pushes it up to the surface.
But the communication was
remarkable.
essential because there was so much, So right now, we heard new types of codas, new types of rhythms, but we're
What do
only...
you think they're saying? Hey, everyone, hurry, or are they just celebrating?
Red alert.
They're like, he looks like you.
Baby coming, red alert, get ready.
Yeah. I mean, do you have a sense of...
There are distinct patterns. So at the moment, it's taken us 5 years to learn the fundamental units, and we're first now building our first language models that are able to interpret behaviors like diving. So we're still baby whales, and we're babbling and learning the first words, but that complicated, probably whatever they were saying there, is very complicated. So that's going to take us a while to get to that. But there were shifts when the dolphins and the pilot whales came in. There were shifts in vocal styles. So we are seeing changes in vocal things. We haven't yet fully grounded all the symbols.
Now, I'm curious, Joey, maybe this is a question for you as the comparative anatomist. If the different whales can understand each other. So all of these other species start coming in. There's a sperm whale birth, but then you start seeing other, I guess in the whale family, but different species. Are they able to, through these mechanisms, hear the different frequencies? They seem quite different, the humpback and the sperm whale.
I think most whales can hear each other, but they may not hear the entire range of their frequencies because toothed whales tend to specialize in the higher frequencies. Baleen whales in the very low frequencies, but there's quite a bit of overlap in the middle. But there definitely is interspecies communication. I have seen wonderful pictures of humpback whales and dolphins playing with each other, where a dolphin swims on top of the rostrum, that's the snouty part on the top of the head, of a humpback whale and goes for a ride. It's been carried around, and then the humpback whale lifts its head up, and the dolphin slides off, and guess what? As soon as the head comes back down, the dolphin goes right back on and does it again. And the humpback whale doesn't shake it off right away, so I think the humpback whale enjoys it too, which to me is interspecies play. I think that's the coolest thing. So somehow they communicated to each other, whether they understood each other's language, whether it's body language, I don't know, but there is communication between species.
And the babies take a while to learn their language and their codas, is that right? So this baby that's born will take a couple of years, 3 years?
Well, they see them babbling quite quickly.
They're
and
babbling.
then locking into the codas, yeah.
Yeah,
So
but for 3 years they're kind of babbling like babies, and then they're speaking their dialect of their clan.
We know from captive orcas that it takes about a month for them to learn how to echolocate. Same thing with dolphins. So they're learning that whole coordination mechanism. So while they're learning how to echolocate, they still need to communicate. So the babies still vocalize. And there's some controversy about what is actually the organ that's making the sound, whether it's coming from the voice box or it's coming from the nose. But they are making sounds even before they learn to echolocate. Right. But full language, just like with humans, it takes time to acquire that. If we could learn the way a baby sperm whale is learning language, we'll probably figure it out.
Now, let's go back to that that project of trying to decode the language. Obviously, you have a technical challenge, which is to record lots of data, but then you're leaning more into these large language models, would you say, or machine learning, where you're going to feed these large data sets leveraging artificial intelligence, but it could be in such a way that there's still a little bit of a black box. It's not algorithmic. So I guess what I'm reaching for is what are you imagining is going to be the output of the most successful version of this aspiration?
I think already that I'm sitting on stage with a bunch of people being like, what are whales saying? Like that is a lot. That we're a weird species, us Homo sapiens, and it's kind of sad that we used to have other Homo of our genus, Homo erectus, to talk to but we're the only ones left, so we're kind of alone, and it's nice to see these other examples of older cultures than ours. What is there to learn from them? Roger Payne taught me that the science doesn't have to be complicated. Whales sing. Like the hugest environmental movement of all time, whales sing. Like I'm such a nerd too, and we're gonna nerd out even in hours after this about we're looking at pictures of I'm fully now understanding how the whales make the sound, and I just learned this piece about the nostrils. But it doesn't have to be complicated, so what are they saying? We're now seeing they're saying very complicated things. It's very interesting, the translation. This project started from translation. Shafi Goldwasser, I met her when I was a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard in 2018, and she was holding a workshop about translation and Google Translate. And it was kind of cool, the evolution of Google Translate, because as they were getting better at the translation models, they would throw away the previous model and then put a new one in place, which is not how evolution works. You can't just throw it away and start anew. And even in photosynthesis, there's weird pieces of it that are very inefficient, like the D1 protein. But in this regard, how to translate, it hit a level where they could translate human languages, not even with any kind of Rosetta Stone, but with enough data, they can see point clouds of where words were in geometric space. And then they could kind of do translation of all human languages just by kind of position in high-level geometry. And so this was now we've now gotten to this point with ChatGPT and all these language models have gotten really good, but they're all working on humans. And we're only getting good at one species. So we're really impressing ourselves that we could write, do our homework for us. And, now it's a problem as professors. We have no idea if our students are cheating anymore. Although you kind of feel it, you kind of tell, you're like, that sounds like that was written by ChatGPT.
Yeah, like the recent National Science Foundation budget report.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's not like you just plug and play this into, well, you have to start all over. So like pieces of it, it's like building a thing of like what piece is interesting, what could be used. And it's kind of what I'm finding out, it's the human brains. It's the humans that are inventing these large language models. They're all open for a new puzzle. And they want to then look at this unknown communication system and try to translate it, which is what we're at.
Yeah. This is going too fast because I have so much more I wanted to ask you. But, well, Joy, it looks like you have something you want to contribute, but I also want to ask you about the evolution of the brain alongside the anatomy that allows for communication and how in lockstep those two things are, if we can tell that they're always co-evolving.
Sure. I just wanted to add one more comment first
Please.
to what David was saying. And there's this great book up there called How to Speak Whale by Tom Mustel. And in it, he describes not only do we need the large language models, we have to get the data of the sounds that we record of sperm whales and other whales in context for what they're doing. Otherwise, we really just have a whole vocabulary of words, but no context in which to figure out what matches what behavior. So it is a combination of language models and behavior together that we really need to crack that code. And of course, understanding the brain is part of understanding how these animals are processing whatever language they are using. We don't know whether they reconstruct things in their head the same way we would. Are they reconstructing it as a thought process in the way we think, or is it something much more amorphous?
Right, their consciousness could be so divergent that the meaning is very hard for us to grasp, even if we get the association of the symbols,
Right.
which we were talking earlier. Food, birth, what the qualia manifests, how it manifests to them could be completely.
But we know they have very complex brains. Their brains are highly folded, and the more folded the brain is, the more gray matter there is, which is the stuff on the outside. So the more folded, the more surface area. But is all of that used for thinking, or is it a lot of it because they are processing very complex sounds into language or reconstructing their environment? Because remember, they're also seeing with sound. So there's two things going on with sound, and they need a very complex brain to process all of that.
Right. I mean, you were saying earlier the fact that you can deduce that they're visualizing the echolocation. Were we able to also study the brain pattern and say, oh, that's actually the love center, or
Right.
some such thing?
We need to see what other parts of the brain light up when they're not echolocating, but they are making sounds.
Right.
Is it a Wernicke's area? Is it Broca's area? What's going on? These different language areas in humans, do they have something similar? Their brain is organized a little bit differently there, so we don't know yet.
Sorry, please.
Well, I was just going to say that's what we're doing in Dominica now with the nonprofit organization Project CETI, is that we built like an underwater recording studio for 20 kilometers squared, and are using all these recording devices and drones. So we have a team of 10 people out there every day collecting data to build up this
Sound and
non-human-
visual, right?
Yes, all millisecond uploaded to the. I mean, it took a lot of work to like build this non-human communication model, but yeah, and I think the next 5 years are where it's going to get really exciting. In terms of we needed that big data set to start really becoming baby whales.
And I have to say, I have a tiny little piece in that project. I gave them some sperm whale material so they could start testing their tags and how it sticks to
That
the
was
skin.
so kind.
So we are actually collaborating.
We work, there's a group at the Harvard Microrobotics Lab where we're working on making these on-whale tags that are now deployed by drones. But we really wanted to be gentle. And there's a postdoc there, Alyssa Hernandez, who's done her whole postdoc on adhesion, and she's looking at suckerfish and clingfish. So those are making up the suction cups. And we needed sperm whale skin. So where do you go? Like you go on the internet and be like, where's sperm whale skin?
I cannot imagine what comes out.
Joy sent like an entire head, I believe.
It was
They were
the
surprised.
the one that you saw the scan of after
Yeah.
we finished scanning it at Mount Sinai? It went up to you.
So
guys.
imagine this robotics lab at Harvard suddenly got a whale head, but they're now using these robotic arms and checking out adhesion, so it's really helpful.
Yeah, I don't want to see your search history, that's for sure. It's like, so I promise to take questions from the audience in our new system, which is still imperfect. I read through some of the questions. I'm going to kind of paraphrase them before I get the last question. I can't believe how quickly we went through the hour. The question is essentially, suppose we can communicate with the whales. Should we? And what's our concern about that first communication? And I know in particular, David, when we thought about doing this, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is I know that this is a big concern of yours, and you think very carefully, and in fact, you asked us to change the title from Talking to Whales to Listening to Whales. But if you could say something for the audience about that philosophy of approaching the whales in a way where we're not doing harm.
Yeah, I just wanted to really think about this moment, like, why are we doing this? Like, and we've watched Dr. Dolittle, and it's been kind of trained in our brains that we're just going to get on the phone and talk to a whale, be like, hey, whale, what's up? And it's going to say something back. But the why is really important to us. And we just wanted to be like, well, humans are in a really weird place right now, where we're in this like in-between phase. We've developed all this technology over the last 170 years. We're kind of scaring ourselves. We're kind of going through a really interesting moment for our species. And like, this is the idea is, can this technology that we've invented, Western technology, bring us closer to nature is kind of the big question. So anytime we do talk, we want it to be in service of the whale and in service of connection and maybe in service of human healing. We started killing these animals. We lit the lamps in Boston with their brains, the spermaceti oil, which is, they probably are pissed off about that name. And hopefully they'll rename it themselves. So we're collaborating with the More Than Human Life Project at NYU School of Law, and we just wrote a paper in Ecology Law Quarterly that kind of poses the question of, if whales have language and the capacity for language, where in the legal system will they be entitled to new rights, and could they even represent themselves in a court for maybe complaining about the noise?
The whales are going to start to sue the dolphins.
Oh, it's going to be
like a whole thing.
A real mess, yeah. So that's the genesis of it.
Joy, also in the spirit of the human connection with the animals and the conservation movements, this is Sludgy, who I believe you studied. Sludgy was a smaller whale that died near the Gowanus Canal. Got stuck in the Gowanus Canal, and I believe you studied Sludgy, but we don't have time for the whole wonderful story of sad Sludgy, but I do want to ask it as a conservationist question. What are the roles the whales play in the entire ecosystem, the biosphere that we need, and what is our responsibility to those animals?
So it's a loaded and packed question. So
Yes, you've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
I'm just kidding.
Sludgy.
Well, whales are a bit of a canary in a coal mine. So if the oceans are going sour, we're going to know it because the whales are dying. Right now, we're getting a lot of whales that wash up dead on the shore, and it is a red flag. In our case, it's probably, at least off our coast, going to be because of the shipping industry and the fishing industry. So they get tangled up in fishing gear, and they get hit by big ships. And most of the whales that I see are through the Marine Mammal Health and Stranding Response Program, in particular the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society in New York and the Marine Mammal Stranding Center in New Jersey. They are who give me access to the carcasses, and we learn from those carcasses what we can. If we understand how and why these whales died, we can try to do something about it and fix that. So we want to understand that. It's not just the biology of how these whales live. It's also what's going on in our environment, because if we're causing it, then we are the solution. We have to fix it.
Now, Roger Payne, we opened the conversation talking about him, died 2 years ago this month and published an op-ed. I believe it was published just 5 days before he passed, but he said with a lot of self-awareness that he was not going to live to see the consequences of this, but clearly he believed there was another conservation movement. And do you feel that this is that opportunity?
So Roger poured like the last 2 years of his life really into this project, and I think it was through the pandemic. He was essentially my best friend, and I learned so much wisdom from him. And when he knew we only had a few days left, he penned that op-ed, and he left a really piece of he said, it's now time to listen to the whales with everything we can muster. And so we're naming a campaign that we'll be launching called Listen to the Whales, which is an homage to the Save the Whales with National Geographic later this year. And I think he thought that if we can get as far as he can from just knowing that they sing, how much further could we get if we're actually able to know what they're saying? So yeah, really, really driven by that.
I think that's a beautiful note for our conversation, and thank you both so much for being here, and please join me in thanking our wonderful guests tonight.